The rain hammered against the palace windows as Captain James Mitchell stood frozen in the doorway of Princess Elena's study. In his trembling hands, he held a leather journal that should never have existed. Vised on its cover gleamed under the dim lamplight, but it was the pages inside that made his blood run cold. For 15 years he had served the crown with unwavering loyalty, but what he had just discovered in the young Princess Charlotte's bedroom would test every oath he had ever taken. Subscribe now. New Royal Guard stories exposing shocking moments inside the royal family. Princess Elena, the beloved Duchess of Ashford, sat at her desk with tears streaming down her face. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as she stared at the evidence spread before her. The same evidence that Captain Mitchell had brought to her attention just 20 minutes ago. "Well, Your Highness," Mitchell said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to decide what to do with this information. If word gets out—" Elena raised her hand, silencing him. She couldn't speak. Not yet. The discovery was too fresh, too devastating. Her daughter Charlotte, her precious 12-year-old daughter, had been keeping secrets, dangerous secrets that could destroy not just their family, but the entire monarchy itself. The journal lay open on the desk between them. Page after page of Charlotte's neat handwriting detailed things no child should know. Names, dates, private conversations that had taken place behind closed doors. But most disturbing of all were the drawings scattered throughout the pages and passageways within the palace walls. Maps of secret rooms that even the current royal family didn't know existed, and detailed illustrations of something far more sinister. A network of tunnels leading directly from the palace to locations throughout the capital city. Captain Mitchell had found the journal purely by accident. He had been conducting his routine security sweep of the royal children's wing when he noticed Charlotte's bedroom door slightly ajar. The princess was supposed to be at her piano lesson, but the sound of muffled crying had drawn him inside. And what he found was an empty room with an overturned chair and scattered papers. Among them, partially hidden under the bed, was the journal. At first, he thought it was simply a child's diary. Perhaps Charlotte was being bullied at school or struggling with the pressures of royal life. But as he flipped through the pages, his concern quickly turned to horror. This was no ordinary diary. The level of detail, the sophisticated understanding of palace security, the knowledge of state secrets— it was impossible that a 12-year-old could have compiled this information on her own. Someone was using Princess Charlotte. Or worse, someone had been teaching her things she should never know. Elena finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse and broken. "Where is she now? Where is my daughter? Still at her piano lesson, Your Highness." "I checked with her instructor. She has no idea that we've found this." Mitchell hesitated before continuing. "Your Highness, with your permission, I need to contact the Royal Intelligence Service. This is beyond palace security now." Probe, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "Absolutely not." "Not yet. We don't know who we can trust." She paced across the room, her elegant gown swishing with each agitated step. "If Charlotte has been compromised, if someone has been manipulating her, then we have no way of knowing how deep this goes. You will. The intelligence service could be infiltrated, involved. Anyone could be watching us right now." Mitchell understood her paranoia. The journal contained information that only a handful of people should possess. Security codes that were changed monthly, the Queen's private schedule for the next 6 months, details about visiting foreign dignitaries that hadn't been publicly announced. Most troubling of all were the entries from the past week. Detailed accounts of private conversations between Elena and her sister, the Queen Consort Margaret, discussions about a potential abdication crisis that was supposed to be absolutely confidential. Elena turned to face him, and for the first time since he had entered the room, he saw not grief but determination in her eyes. "Just you and me. We need to know the truth before we can decide who to trust. Starting tonight, I want you to follow Charlotte. Not openly. Just observe her. Does who she talks to, what she does when she thinks no one is watching. Your Highness, I must advise against that. And well, if there is a genuine threat, Captain, to my daughter, to my family, to the crown itself. Elena picked up the journal, handling it as if it might explode. But I will not throw my 12-year-old child to the wolves without understanding what is happening to her. She's not a spy. She's not a traitor. She's a little girl who loves drawing and piano and those ridiculous romance novels she thinks I don't know about. Someone is using her, and I intend to find out who. He had children of his own. He understood a mother's instinct to protect, but he also understood the weight of duty and the potential consequences if they were wrong. Very well, Your Highness. If at any point I determine that Princess Charlotte or anyone else is in immediate danger, I will act accordingly, even if it means breaking your confidence. She walked to the window and looked out at the palace grounds below. In the distance, she could see the chapel where she had married Charlotte's father 10 years ago. Before he died. Before everything became so complicated. There's something else you need to know, Captain. Something I've never told anyone. Charlotte has been having nightmares, Elena continued, her breath fogging the glass. For months now. She wakes up screaming, talking about voices in the walls, about people watching her through the paintings, about someone called the architect, who visits her room at night and tells her stories about the palace's hidden history. Elena's voice cracked. I thought she was just having bad dreams. The palace counselor said it was normal for children who've lost a parent, anxiety manifesting as vivid nightmares. But now, looking at this journal, I wonder if they weren't nightmares at all. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Well, if Charlotte's nightmares were real, if someone truly had been visiting her at night, then the security breach was far worse than either of them had imagined. It meant someone had access to the most protected areas of the palace, could move freely through spaces that were supposed to be impossible to penetrate, and had been manipulating a child under the noses of dozens of trained security personnel. Is that name written in the journal? Elena shook her head. No. Dad, that's what makes this even more terrifying. Everything in the journal is factual, documented, precise. But she's never mentioned this architect person in writing. Only in her sleep. Only in her nightmares. A knock at the door made them both jump. Elena quickly closed the journal and slipped it into her desk drawer, while Mitchell moved to answer. It was one of the palace attendants, a young woman named Sarah who had served the family for 3 years. Your Highness, I apologize for the interruption, but Princess Charlotte's piano lesson has ended early. Advising him. She's asking for you. She seems quite upset about something. And that, Elena and Mitchell exchanged a glance. Tell her I'll be right there, Elena said, forcing her voice to sound calm and normal. And Sarah, please have tea sent to the blue drawing room. Charlotte's favorite biscuits as well. This is it. I need to talk to her. Try to understand what's happening without letting on that we know. Can you position yourself nearby? If she says anything that suggests immediate danger, I'll be right outside, Mitchell assured her. Your Highness, please be careful. If there is someone called the architect, if they've been manipulating the princess, they may have coached her on what to say if questioned. Children can be taught to lie very convincingly when they're scared. Elena nodded, straightening her shoulders and wiping the last traces of tears from her face. She had to be strong now. For Charlotte. Done. For the family. Whatever darkness had infiltrated their home, whatever conspiracy had ensnared her daughter, she would face it head on. But as she walked toward the drawing room, where her daughter waited, one thought echoed through her mind with terrifying clarity. If Charlotte had been compromised, if she had been turned against her own family, then the very foundation of the monarchy was built on sand. And when the truth finally came out, it would all come crashing down. The palace suddenly felt less like a home and more like a prison, and somewhere in its ancient walls, the architect was watching, waiting to see what they would do next. Princess Charlotte sat curled up in the velvet armchair by the window, her knees drawn to her chest and her arms wrapped tightly around them. She looked so small, so vulnerable, that Elena's heart nearly broke all over again. For a moment she forgot about the journal, the secrets, the conspiracy. All she saw was her baby girl, frightened and alone. Sarah said you wanted to see me. What's wrong? Charlotte's head snapped up, and Elena was struck by the look in her daughter's eyes. Fear. Deep, primal fear that no child should ever have to experience. "Mama," Charlotte whispered, her voice trembling, "something terrible is going to happen. I can feel it." Elena crossed the room and sat on the ottoman in front of Charlotte's chair, taking her daughter's cold hands in her own. "What do you mean, darling? What do you think is going to happen?" "I don't know exactly," Charlotte said, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "But he told me that today was important, that today was when everything would change, thereof, and he said that you would find out soon, and that when you did, you would hate me forever." Elena's blood ran cold. "Who told you this, Charlotte? Who is he?" Charlotte pulled her hands away and buried her face in her knees. "I can't tell you. He said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to you. To Aunt Margaret, to everyone I love. He said he was protecting me, but Mama, I'm so scared. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me." This was it. This was the moment Elena had to decide how to proceed. She could push harder, demand answers, shake the truth out of her daughter, or she could be patient, gentle, and try to earn Charlotte's trust enough to reveal what was happening. She chose the latter. "Charlotte, look at me." Down and Names waited until her daughter's tear-stained face emerged from behind her knees. "I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that you could ever do. Do you understand? You are my daughter. I love you more than anything in this world. And if someone is threatening you, if someone is making you feel afraid, then we need to stop them together." "But you don't understand," Charlotte sobbed. "I've already done terrible things. I've betrayed the family. I've written down secrets that I shouldn't know. I've drawn pictures of places I shouldn't have seen. And it's all my fault because I was curious. I wanted to know the truth about Father, and he promised to tell me if I just did a few small things for him. But the small things kept getting bigger and bigger, and now I don't know how to stop." Elena's heart clenched. Charlotte's father, Prince David, had died in a car accident when Charlotte was only 2 years old. Dowager Field, the official story was that it was a tragic accident caused by poor weather and driver error. But there had always been rumors, whispers in the tabloids and conspiracy theories online, suggesting that something more sinister had occurred. Elena had dismissed them all as nonsense, the desperate imaginings of people who couldn't accept that sometimes terrible things just happened. But now she wondered, if the architect had used Charlotte's desire to know about her father as leverage, what did that mean? What secrets about David's death existed that someone would manipulate a child to keep hidden? "Well, Charlotte," Elena said carefully, "this person who has been talking to you, who has been asking you to do things, does he have a name? He says he built this palace long before any of us were born, and he knows every secret it holds, every hidden passage, every buried scandal, every lie that the royal family has ever told. He showed me things, Mama. Proof that nothing is what we think it is." "What kind of proof?" "Did. Old photographs, letters written by people who are supposed to be long dead. And he showed me the tunnels, the ones that run underneath the palace. He took me through them at night when everyone was asleep. That's how he gets in and out without anyone seeing him. That's how he's been visiting me." Elena felt bile rise in her throat. The thought of someone, anyone, having such unrestricted access to her daughter while she slept was nauseating. But she forced herself to remain calm, to keep her voice steady. "How long has this been going on, Charlotte?" "When did it start?" 6 months ago, Charlotte admitted. "It was the night of the state dinner for the ambassador of Valdoria. Remember? You had to stay late with the guests, and I went to bed early because I wasn't feeling well. That's when he first came to my room. At first I thought he was a ghost, because he appeared out of nowhere. But then he showed me the panel in the wall, behind my wardrobe. There's a whole room back there, Mama. A room that's not on any of the palace blueprints. And that room connects to the tunnels." Elena's mind raced. She had lived in this palace for over a decade. She had been raised in the royal family, had spent her entire childhood within these walls. How could there be entire rooms and tunnel systems that she knew nothing about? Unless Charlotte was being lied to, unless the architect had somehow fabricated evidence to make a lonely, grieving child believe in fantasies. But the journal was real. The information in it was accurate. There was no way Charlotte could have obtained that information through fabrication or fantasy. Someone was feeding it to her. Someone with deep access to the inner workings of the monarchy. Before Elena could ask another question, the tea service arrived. She watched as Charlotte mechanically reached for a biscuit, the young girl's favorite lavender shortbread, and nibbled at it without any real appetite. Elena made small talk about the piano lesson, about Charlotte's upcoming school exams, about anything neutral and normal. She needed to know if they were being listened to. If the architect truly had access to the palace's hidden spaces, he might have access to surveillance capabilities as well. "Charlotte," Elena said casually, as if the thought had just occurred to her, "why don't we take our tea and go for a walk in the gardens? It's stopped raining, and I think some fresh air would do us both good." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, a flash of understanding passing between mother and daughter. "Yes, Mama, that sounds lovely." They walked in silence through the palace corridors, past portraits of long-dead ancestors and tapestries depicting glorious battles from centuries past. Elena nodded politely to the staff they encountered, maintaining the appearance of a casual afternoon stroll. But inside, her mind was working frantically to process everything Charlotte had revealed. Captain Mitchell followed at a discreet distance, his hand resting casually on his hip where his concealed weapon sat. Elena caught his eye once and gave an almost imperceptible nod. They needed to continue this conversation in a place where they could be certain of privacy. The palace gardens were extensive, covering several acres of meticulously maintained grounds. Elena led Charlotte to the rose garden, her favorite spot. It was late afternoon, and most of the gardening staff had finished their work for the day. The space was as private as anywhere in the palace could be. Once they were seated on the gazebo bench, Elena took Charlotte's hands again. "All right, sweetheart. Out here, away from the palace, I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Every detail, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. Can you do that for me? Now." The architect said he had been watching me for a long time. He said that I was special, that I had my father's gift for seeing patterns and understanding how things really worked. He told me that Father hadn't died in an accident. He said Father had discovered something about the palace, about the royal family's real history, and that he was killed to keep him quiet. "Oh, well, did he show you any proof of this?" Elena asked, her voice carefully neutral despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "He showed me Father's personal notebook, the one he kept with him always, the one that was supposed to have been destroyed in the accident. It was full of notes about architectural anomalies in the palace, about rooms that didn't match the official floor plans, about construction expenses that didn't align with the visible improvements. Father had been investigating something, Mama. Something big. David had been obsessed with it in the months before his death. He had been distant, distracted, working late into the night on some project he refused to discuss. She had assumed it was related to his duties as a patron of historical preservation societies. She had never imagined it might be connected to his death. "What did the architect want from you in exchange for this information?" Elena asked. "At first, just small things. He wanted me to tell him about conversations I overheard, about where people were at certain times, about changes in the palace schedule. He said he was trying to protect me by understanding who might be a threat to our family. But I pleaded him, because he had Father's notebook, because he knew things that no stranger could know. But then the requests changed." Charlotte nodded miserably. "He started asking me to write things down, to become better, to document everything I saw and heard. He gave me the journal and told me it was important to keep a record, to have evidence in case something happened to him. He said that if he disappeared, I should give the journal to someone I trusted, someone who could expose the truth. Wu, and the drawings, the maps of the hidden passages. He said it was important that there be a record of the palace's true structure, not just the sanitized version that the public sees. He took me through the tunnels several times, showed me how they connected to different parts of the palace and even to buildings in the city. He said that these passages had been used for centuries by the royal family, to move in secret, to conduct affairs and conspiracies without witnesses. If even half of what Charlotte was saying was true, it meant that the palace, the very seat of their power and authority, was compromised in ways she had never imagined. But it also meant that the architect, whoever he was, had been grooming and manipulating her daughter for months. Using Charlotte's grief over her father, her natural curiosity, and her desire for truth as weapons to turn her into an unwitting spy. Charlotte, has the architect ever asked you to do anything to hurt someone? To poison anyone's food or tamper with anything important? No, Charlotte said quickly, looking genuinely horrified. Nothing like that. He only wanted information, and he said that once I had written down everything I knew, once the truth was documented, then he would take the journal and make sure the right people saw it. People who could bring justice for father's death. And when was this supposed to happen? When was he planning to take the journal? Charlotte's face crumpled. Tonight. He said he was coming tonight to collect it. Bill, but this morning I started to feel like something was wrong, like maybe I had made a terrible mistake. So I hid the journal under my bed because I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to give it to him. And then I went to my piano lesson, but I couldn't concentrate because I was so scared about what would happen when he came and found out I didn't have it ready for him. Under the journal, Charlotte had been having second thoughts, her natural instincts finally warning her that something about this situation was dangerous. But it also meant they had very little time. If the architect was planning to come tonight, they needed to be ready. Charlotte, listen to me very carefully, Elena said, gripping her daughter's shoulders. You are not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. Someone manipulated you, used your love for your father against you, and that is not your fault. But now we need to work together to stop him. Captain Mitchell found your journal earlier today. We know what's in it. And tonight, when the architect comes, we're going to be waiting for him. But Mama, you don't understand. He's not just one person. I think there are others. Sometimes when I was in the tunnels, I heard voices. Multiple people talking. And the architect has access to everything. He knows what the guards do, where they patrol, when they change shifts. He knows about the security cameras and how to avoid them. If you try to catch him, he'll just disappear again. Elena stood up, her decision made. Palace. We'll let him think everything is going according to plan. You're going to go back to your room tonight and wait for him. Captain Mitchell and I will be hidden in your room, in places where we can see and hear everything. When the architect arrives, when he reveals himself, we'll have him. And more importantly, we'll have answers. But what if he's dangerous? What if he tries to hurt you? That's why Captain Mitchell will be there. He's very good at his job, Charlotte. And I promise you, we will not let anything happen to you or to each other. Elena pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. You've been so brave, sweetheart. Braver than anyone should have to be. But I need you to be brave just a little bit longer. Can you do that? Charlotte nodded against her mother's shoulder, her small body still trembling with fear, but also with relief. Finally, she wasn't carrying this burden alone. Finally, someone knew the truth. Then they walked back toward the palace, the sun beginning to set behind them and cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. Elena's mind was already racing ahead to the night's confrontation. She had so many questions. Who was the architect really? What was his endgame? Had he truly been involved in David's death, or was that just another manipulation to control Charlotte? And most importantly, what secrets about the royal family was he trying to expose, and why now? Captain Mitchell fell into step beside them as they reached the palace entrance. Your Highness, he said quietly, we need to talk about logistics. If we're going to do this tonight, we need a solid plan. Come to my study in 1 hour, Elena replied. Charlotte, I want you to go to your room and rest. Well, try to act as normal as possible. If anyone asks, tell them you're feeling better after our talk and that you're going to do some homework before dinner. Do that? Charlotte straightened her shoulders, and Elena saw a flash of the strong, capable woman her daughter would one day become. Yes, Mama, I can do that. As Charlotte disappeared down the corridor toward her wing of the palace, Elena turned to Mitchell. This is going to be dangerous. If Charlotte is right and there are multiple conspirators, if this goes deeper than we think, we could be walking into a trap. I know, but what choice do we have? If we don't confront this tonight, the architect will know we're on to him. he'll disappear, and we'll lose our only chance to understand what's really happening. Then we'd better make sure we're prepared, because tonight we're not just protecting Charlotte. We're protecting the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from a third-floor window, a shadow among shadows as still and patient as stone. The architect had been listening to every word, had been tracking their every move through devices planted throughout the palace grounds, and be pursuing exactly. And he was smiling because everything, absolutely everything, was proceeding exactly according to plan. The clock in Elena's study ticked steadily toward midnight. She sat across from Captain Mitchell, their plans laid out on the desk between them like pieces on a chessboard. Charlotte's bedroom had been transformed into an elaborate trap, though to the untrained eye nothing appeared different. Mitchell had positioned himself inside Charlotte's walk-in closet, where a small gap between the door and frame would allow him to see the entire room. Elena had insisted on being present as well, and after much argument, Mitchell had agreed to conceal her behind the heavy curtains by the window. Charlotte lay in her bed, supposedly asleep, but actually wide awake beneath her covers. They had gone over the plan 3 times. When the architect arrived, Charlotte was to engage him in conversation, to ask him questions that would reveal his true identity and motives. She was to keep him talking long enough for Mitchell to assess the situation and determine the right moment to intervene. It was risky. It required a 12-year-old girl to act as bait. Elena hated every aspect of it, but as Mitchell had pointed out, there was no other way. If they simply waited in the room without Charlotte, the architect would sense the trap and never appear. This was their one chance. Palace had settled into its nighttime rhythm. The changing of the guard had occurred at 11, as it did every night. The minimal overnight staff moved quietly through the corridors, performing their routine duties. Everything appeared normal. No one except Elena, Mitchell, and Charlotte knew that anything unusual was about to happen. At 11:45, Elena took her position behind the curtains in Charlotte's room. Mitchell was already in the closet, his weapon drawn and ready. Charlotte gave her mother one last frightened look before lying back down and closing her eyes, pretending to sleep. They waited. Midnight came and went. Then 12:30. Elena's legs began to cramp from standing motionless. She wondered if the architect had somehow known, if he had discovered their plan and decided not to come. Perhaps Charlotte had been wrong about the timing. Perhaps. A soft click echoed through the room. Elena's heart began to pound. She watched through the tiny gap in the curtains as the panel behind Charlotte's wardrobe slowly swung open, just as Charlotte had described. A dark figure emerged, moving with practiced silence. He was tall, dressed entirely in black, with a hood obscuring his features. In his hands, he carried a small flashlight that he kept pointed at the floor to avoid alerting anyone in the hallway. The architect moved to Charlotte's bedside and stood there for a moment, watching her sleep. Elena had to physically restrain herself from bursting out of her hiding place. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to protect her daughter, to put herself between Charlotte and this intruder. But she forced herself to wait, to trust in the plan. Charlotte, the architect whispered. Wake up, child. It's time. Charlotte stirred convincingly, then sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes as if surprised. You came, she said, her voice perfectly calibrated to sound sleepy and confused. Of course I came. Did you doubt me? The architect's voice was cultured, educated, with an accent that Elena couldn't quite place. British, certainly, but with hints of something else. European, perhaps? I have the journal, Charlotte said, reaching under her pillow where they had placed a dummy notebook, identical to the real one but filled with harmless content. But before I give it to you, I need to know something. I need to know the truth about my father. You promised you would tell me everything once I finished the documentation. The architect took the dummy journal and tucked it into his coat without examining it. Your father was a remarkable man, Charlotte, more remarkable than anyone knew, discovered what I had spent decades concealing. The true nature of this palace, its real purpose, the secrets that have been buried here for over 300 years. What secrets? Charlotte asked, and Elena heard genuine curiosity in her daughter's voice. Despite everything, despite the manipulation and fear, Charlotte still desperately wanted to understand what had happened to her father. "This palace is not what people think it is," the architect said, moving to sit on the edge of Charlotte's bed. "It was never meant to be just a royal residence. When it was constructed in the early 18th century, it was designed with a dual purpose. On the surface, a magnificent home for the monarchy, but beneath, in the tunnels and hidden chambers, something else entirely. A vault, a repository for secrets, documents, and evidence that certain powerful families wanted to keep buried forever. What kind of evidence? Evidence of crimes? Of betrayals. Of conspiracies that would shatter the public's faith in every institution they hold dear. The royal family, parliament, the church, they've all used this place to hide their sins. And for centuries, the architects, the family I belong to, have been the keepers of these secrets. We've maintained the tunnels, preserved the documents, and ensured that the truth remained hidden." Elena felt Mitchell shift slightly in the closet, preparing himself. This was important information, but they needed more. They needed a name, a clear motive, something concrete that would allow them to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. "But if you're supposed to keep the secrets hidden, why are you trying to expose them now?" Charlotte asked, following the script they had prepared. The architect stood and walked to the window, his back to the hidden observers. "Because 30 years ago, someone in the royal family decided that the architects had too much power. They decided that our knowledge made us a liability, beyond systematically destroying us. My father disappeared. My uncle was found dead, ruled a suicide though he knew better. My cousins were forced to flee the country. And 10 years ago, when your father started asking questions, when he discovered evidence of the tunnels and began investigating, they killed him too." Charlotte gasped, and it wasn't an act. Who? Who killed him?" "The same person who has been orchestrating the destruction of my family for 3 decades, up at the right hand of the Queen, advising her on matters of state, while secretly eliminating anyone who threatens the carefully constructed lies that prop up this entire system." The architect turned back to face Charlotte, and in the darkness, Elena could just make out the glint of tears on his face. "Your Aunt Margaret, the Queen Consort. She is the one responsible for all of it." The words hung in the air like poison. Elena felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Margaret? Her sister? It was impossible. Margaret was ambitious, yes, and sometimes ruthlessly pragmatic. A murderer? A conspirator in decades of cover-ups and assassinations? Elena couldn't believe it, but then details began clicking into place in her mind. Margaret had been the one to insist on a quick investigation into David's death. Margaret had been the one to have his personal effects gathered and stored before Elena could properly go through them. Margaret had been the one to suggest that Elena and Charlotte move into the main palace, into rooms that Margaret had specifically selected for them, rooms that Elena now realized with growing horror were probably under surveillance. "You're lying," Charlotte said, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Am I?" "Think about it, Charlotte. Who benefited most from your father's death? Who rose to power in the years that followed? Your Aunt Margaret went from being a minor royal to one of the most powerful people in the kingdom, historic in her way. And she did it by eliminating anyone who stood in her way. He was a prince consort, not even in the line of succession. Because he found proof that Margaret's marriage to your uncle, the king, wasn't legitimate. Proof that she had been married before, to someone she never divorced, which would make her current marriage invalid, and any children from that marriage unable to inherit the throne. Your father was going to expose her, to save the integrity of the succession, and she had him killed for it. Well, Elena burst from behind the curtains, no longer able to contain herself. That's enough! How dare you fill my daughter's head with these lies? The architect spun around, his hand immediately going to something in his coat pocket. Mitchell emerged from the closet at the same moment, his weapon trained on the intruder. Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them. For a moment, they all froze in a tableau of accusation and threat. Then, slowly, the architect raised his hands. Your Highness, he said calmly, addressing Elena, I wondered when you would reveal yourself. The princess is a terrible liar when she's frightened, and she's been frightened this entire conversation. Who are you? Elena demanded. Your real name. Not this architect nonsense. The man reached up slowly and pulled back his hood. In the moonlight streaming through Charlotte's window, Elena could finally see his face. He was perhaps 60 years old, with graying hair and sharp, intelligent features that seemed hauntingly familiar. She knew she had seen him before, but couldn't place where. My name is Marcus Ashworth, he said quietly. Though I doubt that means anything to you. Why would it? The royal family made sure that my family's name was erased from all official records 30 years ago. But you would have known my father, Thomas Ashworth, the royal architect who oversaw the palace renovations in the 1980s, until he discovered what those renovations were really meant to accomplish and tried to expose it. They called it a tragic accident when his scaffolding collapsed. I was 15 years old. Elena's mind raced through memories. She had been young herself when that happened, only 10 or 11, possibly. But she remembered the scandal, the whispers that followed. There had been an investigation, ruled accidental, but there had always been questions. Even if that's true, Elena said, it doesn't give you the right to manipulate my daughter. She's a child, not a weapon in your vendetta. A vendetta? Need your Highness, this isn't about revenge. This is about truth. About ensuring that the same thing that happened to my father, to your husband, doesn't happen to anyone else. The journal that Charlotte created, it's proof. Proof that the palace has been used for decades to hide evidence of corruption and crime. Proof that the royal family is not the benevolent institution the public believes it to be. You have no idea what you're talking about, Elena said. But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her mind. What if he was right? What if David had discovered something terrible? What if his death hadn't been an accident? Mitchell stepped forward, his weapon still trained on Marcus. Mr. Ashworth, you're under arrest for trespassing, for endangering a minor, and for conspiracy against the crown. You have the right to— Wait, Charlotte's voice cut through the tension. She had climbed out of bed and now stood between the adults, her small frame trembling but her voice firm. We need to hear what he has to say. Mama, what if Father really was murdered? What if there are answers in those tunnels? Don't we deserve to know the truth? Charlotte, sweetheart, this man has been manipulating you. I know. Charlotte's eyes blazed with an intensity Elena had never seen before. I know he used me. I know he lied to get me to trust him, but that doesn't mean everything he said is a lie. You taught me that, Mama. You taught me to look for the truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's scary. And the truth is that I've always felt like there was something wrong about Father's death. Everyone said it was an accident, but it never felt like an accident. And now I have a chance to find out what really happened, and I'm not going to let fear stop me. Elena looked at her daughter, this brave, stubborn, brilliant child who had inherited so much of David's determination and idealism. And she realized that Charlotte was right. They couldn't just arrest Marcus and pretend this had never happened. If there was even a possibility that David had been murdered, if there was evidence hidden in the palace's secret chambers, then they had an obligation to investigate, not just for themselves, but for justice. All right, Elena said slowly. I'll make you a deal, Mr. Ashworth. You take us to these tunnels. Comes out. You show us this evidence you claim exists. Captain Mitchell will accompany us, and if at any point I believe we're in danger, he has permission to do whatever is necessary to protect us. But if your evidence is real, if you can prove that David was murdered and that there's been a conspiracy to hide it, then I will help you expose it, regardless of who is implicated. Even if it's my sister. Marcus studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was sincere. Finally, he nodded. Very well, Your Highness. Serve you. But we need to go now, before the guard change at 3. That gives us just over 2 hours to reach the vault and return, before anyone notices we're gone. Mitchell protested immediately. Your Highness, this is insane. We don't know what's down there. It could be a trap. It could be the truth, Captain, Elena interrupted, and I'm tired of living in uncertainty. I'm tired of wondering if my husband's death was my fault somehow, If there was something I missed, some warning sign I ignored, I need to know. We all do, Rel, but you are staying here, young lady. This is not a situation for a child. I'm the one who has been in the tunnels. I know the way. I know what to look for. You need me. Absolutely not. Your Highness, Marcus interjected quietly. The princess is right. The tunnels are a labyrinth. Without her guidance, we could spend hours searching for the vault. With her help, we can be there and back within 2 hours. It's between Marcus and Charlotte. Then at Mitchell, who was shaking his head vehemently. This was a decision that could determine all of their fates. Take Charlotte into potentially dangerous tunnels beneath the palace, following a man who had admitted to manipulating her. Or send Charlotte to safety and risk missing their only chance to uncover the truth. She thought about David, about the man she had loved and lost, about the questions that had haunted her for a decade, about the kind of mother she wanted to be to Charlotte, and the kind of example she wanted to set. Did she want to teach her daughter to run from difficult truths? Report off, regardless of the cost? Charlotte stays close to me at all times, Elena finally said. At the first sign of danger, Captain Mitchell gets both of us out of there, even if he has to carry us. Ashworth, if you're lying about any of this, if this is some elaborate trap, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Do we have an understanding? I'm going to need to do a quick reconnaissance of Charlotte's wardrobe and this hidden passage before we proceed. And Your Highness, I'm going on record as stating that this is a terrible idea. Noted, Captain. But we're doing it anyway. There, have Mitchell had checked the panel mechanism and the passage beyond. The four of them stood at the threshold of Charlotte's secret room. It was small, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls and a low ceiling. The room was completely bare, except for a wooden ladder that led down into darkness. The ladder goes down about 20 feet to the first tunnel level, Marcus explained, pulling a flashlight from his coat. From there, it's a 10-minute walk through the main passage to the vault. I've been down here dozens of times. I know every turn, every dead end, every trap that was built into the system to stop intruders. Traps? Elena asked sharply. Nothing active, Marcus assured her. Bal. Most of them are centuries old and no longer functional. But there are unstable sections, places where the ceiling has partially collapsed. Now, my directions, exactly. Charlotte had already grabbed her own flashlight from her desk drawer. I'm ready, she said with more confidence than Elena felt. They descended the ladder one at a time, Mitchell going first to check for immediate threats, then Charlotte, Elena, and finally Marcus. The tunnel at the bottom was surprisingly well constructed, with brick walls and a vaulted ceiling that allowed them to walk upright. The air was cool and slightly damp, carrying with it the musty smell of earth and age. This way, Marcus said, taking the lead with Mitchell close behind him. And stay in single file. Some of these passages have weak floors. As they walked deeper into the darkness beneath the palace, Elena kept one hand on Charlotte's shoulder, partly to reassure her daughter. The beam of their flashlights illuminated only small circles of the tunnel ahead, leaving the path behind them in complete blackness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps echoing off the stone. After several minutes of walking and 3 turns through intersecting passages, Elena began to understand what Charlotte had meant about the tunnels being a labyrinth. Without a guide, they could wander down here for days and never find their way out. She made mental notes of landmarks as they passed. A section where the brick had been replaced with newer stone. A carved symbol on the wall that looked like it might be a direction marker. A place where water dripped steadily from a crack in the ceiling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, they reached a dead end. A massive stone door blocked their path, covered in intricate carvings that depicted scenes from royal history. Some of the images were celebratory, showing coronations and victories, but others were darker, showing executions, secret meetings, and what appeared to be bodies being lowered into the ground. This is it, Marcus said. The Vault of Secrets. Everything the royal family has tried to hide for 300 years is behind this door. He approached a specific spot on the wall beside the door and pressed a series of stones in a pattern. There was a grinding sound, and slowly, ponderously, the massive door began to swing open. Beyond it lay a chamber that took Elena's breath away. The vault was enormous, stretching far beyond what their flashlights could fully illuminate. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with shelves, and those shelves were packed with boxes, files, and ancient leather-bound books. In the center of the room stood a long table covered in dust, and on that table lay several items arranged as if waiting for them. Documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a leather notebook that Elena recognized immediately as David's missing journal. "How is this possible?" Elena whispered, moving toward the table as if in a trance. "We searched everywhere for that notebook. The investigation team, the palace staff, everyone looked. It was supposed to have been destroyed in the accident," Marcus said grimly. Or rather, she thought she had it destroyed. Topic. She didn't know that your husband had made copies and hidden them down here, in the one place he thought she would never look. The pages fell open to a section filled with David's familiar handwriting, interspersed with sketches and diagrams. But it was the date at the top of the page that made her breath catch. 2 days before his death. "Well," she read aloud, her voice breaking with emotion. "I've confirmed it. The marriage certificate is real, dated 3 years before Margaret's wedding to the king. She never divorced her first husband, which means her marriage to my brother is invalid. More than that, I found evidence that she knew about the invalidity and proceeded anyway, planning to use her position as queen consort to gradually accumulate power until she could orchestrate some kind of abdication or succession crisis. What does she want? What is she building toward?" Charlotte had moved to stand beside her mother, reading over her shoulder. "Father knew," she whispered. "He knew Aunt Margaret was lying about everything." Mitchell had been systematically checking the perimeter of the vault, his weapon drawn and his expression grim. "Your Highness, we need to photograph everything here and get back to the palace. If this documentation is real, we need to secure it before—" Footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, approaching rapidly. Marcus spun toward the door, his face pale. "No. Now, this isn't possible. No one knew we were coming here. No one could have followed us. Unless someone was watching Charlotte's room," Mitchell said, already moving to position himself between the door and the civilians. "Your Highness, take Charlotte and move to the back of the vault. Now." But Elena stood frozen, staring at the entrance as a group of figures emerged from the darkness. There were 5 of them, all dressed in the dark uniforms of the palace's elite security force. And at their head, looking perfectly composed despite the damp tunnel air and the late hour, was Queen Consort Margaret. "Now, hello, Elena," Margaret said, her voice carrying the same warm, affectionate tone she always used with her sister. "I see you found David's little treasure trove. Now, I must admit, I'm impressed. I've spent 10 years searching for this vault, and you managed to locate it in a single evening. Well done." Elena found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "It's true. Everything Marcus said, everything David wrote, it's all true. You were married before. Your marriage to the king is invalid." Margaret laughed, a bright, genuine sound that was somehow more chilling than any threat could have been. "Oh, Elena. Sweet, naive Elena. Do you really think that matters anymore? Do you think anyone would believe it even if you brought that certificate to the High Court? I've been queen consort for 15 years. I've built relationships, cultivated allies, ensured that every person in a position of power either owes me a favor or fears me. The truth is irrelevant when you have enough influence to shape what people believe. Do? Well, DMA. Then why are you here?" Elena demanded, pulling Charlotte closer to her side. "If you're so secure in your power, why come yourself? Why not just send your men?" "Because I wanted to make you an offer," Margaret said, stepping into the vault with her guards following close behind. Mitchell kept his weapon trained on them, but he was outnumbered 5-1, and everyone in the room knew it. "I want to make sure you understand the situation completely before you make any decisions that could have tragic consequences." "Is that a threat against my daughter?" "It's a statement of reality," Margaret replied calmly. "You can take that notebook, take Charlotte, and leave this vault. You can go to the authorities, to the press, to whomever you like. You can try to expose what you think is a conspiracy, and I will make sure that you are declared mentally unfit, that Charlotte is taken from your custody for her own protection, and that the only person who suffers from tonight's adventure is you. You can't do that. People know I'm sane. They'll never believe, won't they? You're a widow who has struggled with grief for a decade. Your daughter has been having disturbing nightmares and exhibiting signs of psychological distress. A respected member of the palace security staff will testify that he discovered you sneaking through hidden tunnels in the middle of the night with your daughter and a known conspiracy theorist. A palace physician will confirm that you've been under tremendous stress, and the court psychologist will regretfully conclude that you've suffered a breakdown and need intensive treatment. Ourselves. But these things happen. Charlotte made a small sound of distress, and Elena wrapped her arms around her daughter protectively. And what's my other choice? You forget this ever happened, Margaret said simply. You go back to your comfortable life in the palace. Charlotte continues her education. You both stay safe, healthy, and free. I'll even make sure that Charlotte's little journal never sees the light of day, happened into documenting sensitive information. She can move forward without that hanging over her head. In exchange for our silence, Elena said bitterly, in exchange for your understanding that some truths are too dangerous to be revealed. Elena, I'm not a monster. I didn't kill David. I didn't kill Marcus's father. I've never personally harmed anyone. Then who did? Marcus demanded, speaking for the first time since Margaret's arrival. Who killed my father? Who ran Prince David off the road? Margaret turned to look at him with something that might have been pity. No one killed your father, Mr. Ashworth. He died in an accident, just as the investigation concluded. Sometimes scaffolding fails. Sometimes weather conditions are poor. Sometimes terrible things happen without there being a grand conspiracy behind them. Well, I don't believe you. I don't care if you believe me. I care what you can prove. Still. And the answer to that is nothing. You've spent 30 years investigating, and what do you have? Visions, coincidences, a marriage certificate that, while real, can be easily explained as a youthful mistake that was annulled before my legal marriage. Nothing that would stand up in court. Nothing that would convince the public to turn against their beloved queen consort. Elena looked down at David's notebook in her hands. She thought about the countless entries, the meticulous documentation, the clear evidence that her husband had been afraid of something in his final days. And she thought about Margaret's offer. Safety for herself and Charlotte in exchange for allowing a lie to stand unchallenged. What about David? Elena asked quietly. You said you didn't kill him, but did you know he was in danger? Did you know something was going to happen and choose not to warn him? For the first time, Margaret's composure cracked slightly. A flash of something, grief, guilt, regret. David was reckless. He was obsessed with this idea that there were great conspiracies within the royal family. I tried to warn him that his investigations were making him enemies. I tried to convince him to let it go. But he wouldn't listen. He kept digging, kept asking questions, kept threatening to expose things that powerful people wanted kept hidden. What people? What things? It doesn't matter anymore. Well, they're not connected to me or my marriage. They're not connected to you or Charlotte. They're old scandals, old crimes, things that happened before any of us were born. But there are families, institutions, who have spent generations burying those secrets. And when David threatened to unearth them, they took action. You're saying someone else killed him, Mitchell interjected. Someone you knew about but chose not to identify or stop. I'm saying that I couldn't stop it. I'm saying that I tried to protect David. And when that failed, I tried to make sure that his death served a purpose. Not that it would be the last death. That if everyone believed it was an accident, the people responsible would be satisfied and move on. And they did, Elena said, the pieces finally clicking into place. They did move on. They agreed to keep their secrets in exchange for them leaving your family alone. That's why you've spent 10 years trying to find this vault. Not to protect your own secret about the marriage, but to make sure David's evidence about these other crimes never surfaced. Margaret's silence was confirmation enough. Charlotte, who had been listening to this entire exchange with growing horror, suddenly pulled away from her mother. "People, you let them kill my father," she said, her young voice shaking with rage and grief. "You knew he was in danger, and you let them kill him, and then you pretended to care. You hugged me at his funeral. You told me he was watching over me from heaven. You lied to my face for 10 years. "Charlotte, I'm sorry," Margaret said, and for the first time she actually sounded sincere. "I know you won't believe me, but I am truly sorry. David was my friend before he was your father. Foul over him. I loved him like a brother, and I have regretted every day for the past decade that I couldn't save him. Damned." "But you could have," Charlotte screamed. "You could have gone to the police. You could have warned him." "You could have done something, and if I had, they would have killed him anyway. And then they would have killed you and your mother. And probably me as well. I made a choice to save who I could save. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes there are no good options. Sometimes all you can do is minimize the damage." She looked at the notebook in her hands, at the evidence of her husband's final investigation, and she thought about what publication would mean. It would expose Margaret's invalid marriage. It would reveal whatever other scandals David had uncovered. But it would also put Charlotte in terrible danger. Because if Margaret was telling the truth, if there were powerful people who had already killed to keep these secrets buried, they wouldn't hesitate to kill again. "Who are they?" Elena asked. "These people who killed David. Give me names." "I can't," Margaret said. "Not because I'm protecting them, but because if I tell you, you'll try to go after them, and they will kill you." "Elena, please. I know you think I'm the villain in this story, but I'm trying to protect you. Let this go. Incident. Take Charlotte home. Live your life. Don't make the same mistake David made." Elena looked at Captain Mitchell, who had remained silent throughout this confrontation, but whose expression clearly communicated his opinion. They should fight. They should expose everything and deal with the consequences. Then she looked at Marcus, whose entire life had been devoted to uncovering the truth about his father's death and who deserved justice. And finally she looked at Charlotte, her brave, brilliant, beautiful daughter, who had already suffered so much loss. "I need time," Elena said finally. "I need time to think about this, to decide what's right." "You have until dawn," Margaret replied. "I'll wait in the tunnel. If you decide to keep David's evidence and try to expose what happened, I won't stop you. I'll let you walk out of here, and whatever happens after that will happen. But if you decide to let it go, to choose safety over truth, then I'll arrange for this vault to be sealed permanently. No one will ever find it again. The choice is yours." Margaret turned and walked out of the vault, her guards following her. Mitchell immediately moved to the door, checking to ensure they had actually left and weren't waiting in ambush just outside. "They're gone," he confirmed. "They've taken up positions about 50 feet down the tunnel, waiting, like she said." Elena sank into one of the dusty chairs by the table. Charlotte climbed into her lap, something she hadn't done since she was very small, and buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Marcus stood by the shelves, his hand running over the spine of one of the ancient books. "I've waited 30 years for this moment," he said quietly. 30 years to find proof that my father didn't die because of negligence or bad luck. And now that I have it, now that I know the truth, I find that it doesn't change anything. He's still gone. My family is still destroyed, and the people responsible are still free. What do you want to do?" Elena asked him. "If we publish this, if we expose everything, it will vindicate your father. People will know he died trying to uncover corruption, but it won't bring him back," Marcus replied. "And it might get you and Charlotte killed. Your Highness, I'm angry. I'm bitter. I've spent most of my life consumed with the need for justice, but I'm not willing to sacrifice a child to get it. If you decide to keep this secret, I'll respect that decision." Elena held Charlotte tighter, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. She thought about David, about what he would want her to do, and he had been an idealist, a believer in truth and transparency. He had died trying to expose corruption. Would he want his daughter to be put at risk to finish his work? Or would he want Charlotte to be safe, even if it meant letting his killers go unpunished. "Captain Mitchell," Elena said, "you've been very quiet. What's your professional assessment of our situation?" "Ma'am, I think we're being played. I think Queen Consort Margaret is more afraid of what's in this vault than she's letting on. I think if we walk away from this, we're giving up leverage that could protect us in the future. And I think that if we publish David's evidence, the resulting scandal might actually make us safer, not more vulnerable, because any attempt to harm us would be immediately connected to the exposure." "But you can't guarantee that," Elena said. "No, ma'am. I can't. This is a situation where any choice carries significant risk." Elena closed her eyes, trying to imagine what the next weeks and months would look like under each scenario. If they exposed everything, there would be investigations, trials, media scrutiny. Charlotte would be thrust into the spotlight as the daughter of a murdered prince who died trying to expose royal corruption. Every detail of their private life would be examined. And somewhere out there, people with the power and resources to have committed murder once might try to do it again. But if they stayed silent, they would be complicit in covering up that murder. They would be allowing Margaret, whoever else was involved, to escape consequences. They would be teaching Charlotte that the truth mattered less than personal safety. And they would be abandoning Marcus, who had spent his entire adult life searching for answers about his father's death. "I need to see everything that's in here," Elena said suddenly. "Before I can make a decision, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Not just David's notebook, but all of it. Everything this vault contains." For the next hour, they searched through the vault's contents. They found documents dating back centuries, proof of assassinations, evidence of stolen elections, records of financial crimes that had enriched certain noble families at the expense of the common people. They found birth certificates that proved current aristocrats were illegitimate, marriage certificates that invalidated inheritances, and death certificates that suggested murders had been ruled natural causes. The scope of it was staggering. Generations of crimes, all carefully documented and preserved. And Elena began to understand why David had been killed. It wasn't just about Margaret's invalid marriage. It was about a system of corruption so vast, so entrenched, that exposing any part of it threatened to bring down the entire structure. "This is too much," Charlotte said, looking at the piles of evidence they had laid out. "Mama, even if we wanted to expose all of this, how would we even begin?"
"Who would we trust to investigate? The same institutions that have been covering this up for hundreds of years."
She was right. The problem wasn't just gathering evidence. It was finding anyone with the power to act on that evidence who wasn't already compromised by the system they would be trying to reform. Elena picked up David's notebook again and read through his final entries more carefully. And that's when she found it. On the very last page, written the night before he died, a single sentence that changed everything. "If I don't survive this, I've arranged for copies of all evidence to be sent to trusted journalists in 5 different countries. Dead man switch activated. The truth will come out regardless of what happens to me." "Marcus," Elena said urgently, "did David ever contact you? Before he died, did he send you anything, ask you to do anything?" Marcus looked confused. "No, Your Highness. I didn't even know Prince David was investigating the palace secrets until you told me about his notebook tonight." "Why?" "He had a backup plan. He arranged for the evidence to be released automatically if something happened to him. But it never was released, which means either his plan failed or someone intercepted it. Margaret, maybe. Or whoever killed him. Or," Mitchell said slowly, "it was never meant to be released immediately. It was meant to be a deterrent. Tell the people planning to kill you that if they do, the evidence goes public. Hope that the threat keeps you safe." "But it didn't work," Charlotte said sadly. "They killed him anyway." Unless, Elena breathed, a new possibility occurring to her. Unless the evidence did get sent, but the journalists decided not to publish it. Maybe they were threatened. Maybe they were bribed. Or maybe they just didn't believe it was real. Marcus had begun searching through the vault shelves again, looking for something specific. If Prince David prepared evidence packages for journalists, he might have kept records of who he sent them to. Names, addresses, contact information. If we could find those records, we could reach out to those same journalists now. With 10 years of distance from the event, with additional corroboration from us, they might be willing to publish now when they weren't willing to then. It took another 30 minutes of searching, but they finally found it. A file labeled insurance, containing photocopies of everything David had planned to send out, along with a list of 5 journalists' names and the media organizations they worked for. 3 in Britain, 1 in Germany, 1 in the United States. All of them specializing in investigative journalism focused on government corruption and abuse of power. Elena stared at the list, her decision crystallizing. We're not going to publish everything in this vault. That would be chaos. But we are going to publish David's evidence about what happened to him and to Marcus's father. Acquire some. We're going to give those families closure and justice. And we're going to make sure that whoever was responsible faces consequences. Even if it puts us in danger? Charlotte asked. We'll be in danger either way, Elena replied. Employee. If we stay silent, we give these people power over us forever. They'll always know that we have this evidence, and they'll always be wondering if we might change our minds. At least if we publish, if we make everything public, we have the protection of transparency. It's much harder to make someone disappear when the whole world is watching. Mitchell nodded approvingly. Smart, ma'am. Nia, and I'll make sure that Palace Security is aware of the situation. Not officially, because we don't know who we can trust. But I have contacts in other security services, people I've worked with who aren't connected to the palace. We can arrange protection that doesn't rely on the compromised system. Well, what about Margaret? Marcus asked. She's waiting outside for your answer. Then let's go give it to her. They gathered what they needed from the vault. David's original notebook, the insurance file with the journalists' names, and a few key documents that proved the connection between David's investigation and his death. Everything else they left in place, carefully reorganizing the shelves so no one would immediately notice what had been taken. When they emerged from the vault, Margaret was indeed waiting, seated on a small folding chair one of her guards must have brought, looking as composed as if she were waiting for tea service rather than a decision that could destroy her life. Well, she asked as they approached. Well, we're going to publish David's evidence, Elena said firmly. Not everything in the vault, but enough to ensure that the truth about his death comes out. I'm sorry, Margaret, but I can't let his killers go unpunished just to protect myself. Margaret stood slowly, her expression unreadable. I understand. I don't agree with your decision, but I understand it. And I hope you understand that there will be consequences. Not from me. I've told you the truth about my involvement. But from the people who ordered David's death, they won't be happy about this. Then they shouldn't have killed my husband, Elena replied coldly. Margaret nodded sadly. I suppose not. She looked at Charlotte, who was holding tightly to her mother's hand. Ties our rights on Charles. I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. But I want you to know that I have always loved you, and I have always tried, in my own flawed way, to protect you. I failed your father. I won't fail you. Before anyone could respond, Margaret turned and walked away into the darkness of the tunnel, her guards following her. Elena waited until the sound of their footsteps had faded completely before allowing herself to breathe. We need to move quickly, Mitchell said. Once Queen Consort Margaret reports back to whoever she reports to, they'll start preparing their response. We need to get those materials to the journalists tonight if possible. They made their way back through the tunnels, Charlotte leading them with a confidence born of familiarity. When they finally climbed the ladder back into Charlotte's secret room and emerged into her bedroom, the first light of dawn was beginning to color the sky outside her window. Elena pulled Charlotte into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. You were so brave tonight.
I'm scared, Mama, Charlotte admitted.
What if they come after us? What if... Then we'll face it together, Elena promised. All of us. Captain Mitchell, Marcus, you, and me. And we'll have the truth on our side, which is more powerful than any threat. Over the next few days, Elena worked with Marcus and Mitchell to contact the journalists on David's list. 2 of the British journalists had retired, 1 had died, and the 4th had moved to a different publication. But the American journalist, now working as an editor at a major newspaper, remembered receiving David's package 10 years ago and being frustrated that his superiors wouldn't let him publish it. With fresh corroboration from Elena and Marcus, and with additional evidence from the vault, he agreed to run the story. The article was published on a Tuesday morning, and within hours it had exploded across international media. The headline read, "Prince David was murdered. New evidence suggests royal cover-ups span decades." The story detailed David's investigation, the discovery of the vault, and the evidence pointing to a conspiracy involving multiple powerful families and institutions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, 3 different government agencies had announced investigations. Several members of parliament called for a special inquiry, and most significantly, the families implicated in the historical crimes documented in the vault began turning on each other, each trying to negotiate immunity by providing evidence against the others. Margaret held a press conference, where she tearfully admitted that she had known David was in danger, but had failed to protect him. She resigned her position as queen consort and announced that she would cooperate fully with all investigations. Whether she would face criminal charges remained to be seen, but her public role was effectively over. As Mitchell had predicted, the publicity actually did provide some protection for Elena and Charlotte. Attempts to intimidate or silence them would have been too obvious, too connected to the scandal. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by security, both official and unofficial, as various agencies competed to ensure their safety, and not coincidentally, Marcus was finally able to bury his father's memory with honor, as new investigations confirmed that Thomas Ashworth's death had indeed been connected to his discovery of the vault and its contents. Several individuals were eventually charged with conspiracy to commit murder, though whether anyone would ultimately be convicted for crimes committed 30 years earlier remained uncertain. Charlotte returned to school and tried to resume her normal life. She was no longer just a princess. She was the girl who had helped expose one of the greatest scandals in royal history. But she handled the attention with grace and maturity, and Elena could see David in every brave choice her daughter made. 3 months after the story broke, Elena stood in the renovated rose garden, looking out at the palace that had been her home and her prison. Workmen were busy sealing off the entrance to the tunnel system, making it impossible for anyone to use those hidden passages again. The vault's contents had been transferred to the National Archives, where historians and investigators would spend years cataloging and analyzing them. "Your Highness," Captain Mitchell said, approaching from behind, "there's someone here to see you." Elena turned to find an elderly man in an expensive suit, waiting at the garden entrance. He looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Well, not personally, Your Highness, but I knew your husband. My name is Robert Ashford. I was one of the people David was investigating when he died." Elena's hand went instinctively to the panic button hidden in her jacket pocket, but the man raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to confess and to apologize." Over the next hour, sitting in the gazebo where Elena had comforted Charlotte just months earlier, Robert Ashford told his story. He had been part of the conspiracy to silence David, not because he wanted the prince dead, but because David had discovered evidence that Ashford's grandfather had embezzled funds meant for war widows in the 1940s. Ashford had been trying to protect his family's reputation, and when gentler methods of persuasion failed, he had gone along with more extreme measures. "I never actually gave the order," Ashford said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I just didn't stop the others. I told myself that I wasn't responsible, that I was just trying to protect my family. But I've spent 10 years knowing that I let a good man die because I was a coward. And when I saw your daughter on television, looking so much like her father, I couldn't carry that weight anymore." Elena listened without interrupting, her own tears falling silently. When Ashford finished, she said, "You need to tell this to the investigators. All of it." "I know," Ashford replied. "That's why I came here first. I wanted to apologize to you personally before I turned myself in, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," Elena said quietly. "It won't bring David back, but it's worth something." After Ashford left, escorted by Mitchell to meet with the investigators, Elena sat alone in the gazebo for a long time, about his idealism and his determination to uncover the truth. She thought about Charlotte, growing up too fast, but growing into someone strong and brave. And she thought about herself, about the choices she had made and would continue to make. The truth had come out, but it hadn't brought the closure she had hoped for. Instead, it had opened up new questions, new complications, new challenges. The investigation would continue for years. The legal battles would be lengthy and painful, and the scars on the monarchy's reputation might never fully heal. But they had done the right thing. They had chosen truth over comfort, justice over safety, and whatever came next, they would face it together. As the sun set over the palace grounds, casting long shadows across the rose garden, Charlotte came running out to find her mother. "Mama, you have to see this." The historian they brought in to catalog the vault found something. Letters from the 18th century that proved the palace was built on land stolen from common farmers. And there's talk of using some of the royal family's private funds to compensate their descendants. Alina smiled at her daughter's excitement, at this young girl who had been through so much, but who still believed that the world could be made better, one truth at a time. They walked back toward the palace together, mother and daughter, ready to face whatever new revelations awaited them. Because that was their life now. Not the quiet, comfortable existence they had once known, but something harder and more meaningful. A life dedicated to truth, to justice, and to making sure that the secrets that had claimed David's life would never claim anyone else's. The palace loomed before them, its windows glowing with warm light against the darkening sky. It was no longer just a home or a symbol of power. It was a reminder that every institution, no matter how old or respected, was only as honest as the people who maintained it. And from now on, Elena and Charlotte would be among those people, determined to ensure that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, would never again be buried in the darkness beneath the palace walls.